All right, the next champion we're going over, doing Ionia. So that's going to be Lee Sin. Lee Sin is a 6 cost, 3/6. So he's very below the curve. But when you cast a spell, you give Lee Sin Challenger this round. And if you cast another spell, he also gains Barrier. And he levels up when you've cast 7 plus spells this game. So he doesn't have to be on the board. He doesn't need to see you cast the spells. But once you do that, he'll level up. And then he becomes a 4/7. And he keeps the Challenger and the Barrier on spellcast. But he gains I Dragon Rage enemies that I challenge. So Dragon Rage is actually a spell. And it'll... Here's the spell that he'll add to the stack when he challenges an enemy. And he'll kick an enemy into their nexus, striking both. So it strikes both the enemy unit and it strikes the nexus. And then after striking the unit, if it survives, it gets recalled or returned to the enemy hand. So Lee Sin's kind of interesting. Lee Sin is being tested in spell buff decks, sort of. So I sort of have to explain these abilities in that context. So when you look at Lee Sin, his body's tiny, but Challenger and Barrier benefit a lot from buffing the attack of a unit. And that's generally how I see you're going to use Lee Sin even going forward as the meta evolves. You're going to run ways to pump up Lee Sin, make him individually stronger, so that when he does attack and does cast Dragon's Rage, it has large board impact, often killing the enemy unit so it's not recalled, and hitting the enemy nexus for a lot of damage. I also see him being very good with Overwhelm, because if he has Overwhelm, then you're sort of double attacking the enemy nexus, once with the Dragon's Rage, once after the unit is gone, because it was either killed or recalled. He's then hitting the nexus for the full attack value that he has.
Do you know if that's how that interaction works, by the way?
Yeah, it does work that way.
Wow, that's crazy. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's because this is hitting first. It's not when he
You're right.
strikes. It's
So
when
he
he
still
challenges.
attacks after.
Right.
That's nuts.
So yeah,
Okay.
some people were trying that with Vi a little bit, where they were getting the Dragon's Rage, right, and then they were getting her to 10 attack and then just one-shotting the enemy. But that's sort of off topic with dragons,
Yeah,
with Lee Sin, and discussing the Dragon's Rage application. But yeah, he hits them real big all at once. And I think he's a very solid card as long as your deck is running lots of spells. I think your deck just needs to be flush with spells to run this card. But if it is, or if you're running a lot of the double spells that were printed in the set that are supposed to synergize with Lee Sin, then he's a good game ender.
Yeah, we were talking a bit earlier about how one way to look at champions is their building cost. Like, do you have to build around this champion? Is he just a good generic card? Lee Sin is not a good generic card. He is a great build around card.
Yes.
Generically, this card, if you like in a normal deck, you're looking at give or take 10 to 12 spells, and then the rest being units. Lee Sin won't flip. But in a build around deck where you're running give or take 20 spells, and a lot of them creating other spells, you'll end up flipping Lee Sin pretty consistently. And a flipped Lee Sin can just win the game, as we were saying earlier. It can just control the board. So that's really important to understand. You don't want to just be like, oh, I have an extra champion slot. You know, can I put Lee Sin in? No, you don't put Lee Sin in. But if it's like, oh, I want to make a Lee Sin deck, is that good? Yeah, it's probably pretty good.
So here is Swim's Mighty Lee Sin deck. So the point of this deck, as we were discussing, is to play lots of spells. This deck has 20 spells in it, which is quite high. And some of the spells are even the double spells, like Sonic Wave. And the point of this deck is to buff a big unit or a unit with Overwhelm and kill the opponent with a very strong attack. So I'm going to go through some of the aspects of this deck that make it better than this deck concept was before. There actually were before Ionia Noxus pump decks, but they weren't very good. They didn't have enough good units to use the buffs on to try to win the game. Also, they suffered from a lack of early game cards that were strong and powerful that helped them reach those combo turns. So they printed Claws of the Dragon in Rise of Tides, and you're not always going to play this as a free 3/2. Sometimes you're actually going to pay 2 for the 3/2. But before, this kind of deck didn't really have any 3-powered units it even wanted to run at 2 cost. And that was a big weakness for the deck against fearsome decks, against enemy units that just had 3 health that you wanted to block and trade with. And then they very notably gained Eye of the Dragon. So this is a 2-cost 1/3 attune, which refills 1 spell mana when you play the unit. And at the start of a round, if you've played two or more spells last round, you get a Dragonling, which is a 2-cost 2/1 ephemeral lifesteal, which is pretty weak, but you get this unit for free, and it's sort of hard to deal with a 2-cost 1/3 in a forceful way, unless you have like Fleetwood Tracker and War Chefs. Usually this can come down, and it's just annoying to remove. Your opponent doesn't want to spend the resources killing it. So those are my thoughts specifically on the early game that the deck has gained. Do you have any thoughts, MTuck, on the early game aspects of this deck?
I think Eye of the Dragon's a crazy card. I like every deck that was heavy into spells that struggled with early game, just because of that card, doesn't struggle with early game anymore. Like, without getting into too much details, like you have this deck, you have Karma Ezreal now, who used to struggle versus aggressive decks, and like now I've got 2 bodies like every turn that can deal with your aggressive decks, and if you kill them, well, cool, I still get the lifesteal, so I'm still like staying alive.
Yeah, exactly. The lifesteal is huge on this card.
Yeah, like, because you're not using this card to like do damage. You're using this card to stall. So this is like, sure, cool, 2/1's nice to do some damage, but it's gaining 2 health every single turn and preventing the health that would have hit your Nexus via that block. Like, it's just so strong. You don't want to attack. Like, think about the 5/5 ephemeral lifesteal card. When your opponent plays that card on your attack, you don't want to attack into them because you don't want to trade. You don't want to give them free lifesteal. It just instantly stops your attack for 3 mana. Eye of the Dragon is a mini version of that every single turn.
Pretty much. That's been my experience of Eye of the Dragon. Playing a little bit with it and playing against it, this card just stalls the game.
Exactly. You don't want to attack into it because you don't want to lose 2 damage on your units for free.
Now I want to just talk a little bit about how all the ways that this deck sort of creates wins. So the reason you play Draven in this deck is not really the traditional way to play Draven. Traditionally, you play Draven to get these spinning axes for other units to trade up. But in this deck, you actually try to level Draven, because when Draven's leveled, he gets Overwhelm. So he's just a cheap way to generate an Overwhelm body in this list, as opposed to the traditional ways that you might play Draven.
And plus his axes count towards Lee Sin, which is nice.
Right. And every time you do those axes, you're right, you're getting this Lee Sin trigger to get to 7, which is very nice. Might's here to give anybody who doesn't have Overwhelm so that they can lethal. Shadow Assassin, this card's still seeing play in pretty much every Ionia deck, just as a way to block elusives and to draw cards. And in this deck, elusive's very nice against non-elusive decks because, well, then you have another target to dump all your pumps on to try to lethal the opponent. So, Concussive Palms is actually better than I thought it was. I thought this card really needed the benefit of stun, so you needed to be in Yasuo or something for this card to be great. Because really, if you look at it, it's a 4-cost Arachnoid Sentry, but it's fast, and and you can use Spell Mana on it, and that made a big difference apparently. So that's something I missed.
Yeah, that card's seeing play in Karma Ezreal as well as this deck. It's a really solid card. In this deck, its primary use is to effectively remove a blocking target. So you attack with something with Overwhelm. Let's say you attack with a leveled up Draven. It's a 4/4. They block with their. We'll say you're versing the Sejuani deck we just talked about. They block with their Hearthguard. Your Draven should be dying here. Well, if you stun the Hearthguard goes back to bench. You usually would then be attacking into like that cloud or whatever, like the ghost block that would do no damage. But because you're overwhelmed, you just do all of your damage straight to the Nexus. So having a fast stun is really solid for overwhelmed decks because it lets you get your full attack in when otherwise you.
And stuns before, just in general, were not fast. It was basically decisive maneuver, and this is better than decisive maneuver.
Yep, decisive maneuver was the only fast one you could use on your attack. You had Yasuo's spell that you could use on their attack, but specifically on your attack, yeah, it was just decisive maneuver.
And then to play into the spell plan, Deep Meditation is really good. I think this card almost always costs 2.
Yep, it's extremely busted.
I mean, I don't know a better way to say it. It's really simple, but it keeps your things going. So it's not just that you get 2 spells and this costs 2. It's that it helps you draw another spell so that next turn you will have had that 2 spell trigger condition met.
Yep, it's a nuts card. Like, it's everyone I've heard talk about that card has said that it needs to go to a 5 mana that drops to 3 mana. Because it's as a 2 mana, pretty much any deck that's running that card will consistently get it to 2 mana. It's a 2 mana glimpse without the downside of glimpse. It's a draw 2.
Absolutely.
Like that is crazy. A 2 mana burst draw 2. Like we have the equivalent in Buildwater with Salvage, which is a 4 mana draw 2 and toss 2. And that's 4 mana. Like, no, you can't make that cheaper. It's 4 mana. Like, this is half the cost of the same card, except not even just the same card. This only draws spells. And when your deck wants to draw spells, like this deck in Karma Ezreal, that's great. You're happy with that. Like, that is better than just draw 2.
Another interesting application in this deck is because it's burst, you can do wonky things like attack and see how your opponent blocks, and then Deep Meditation, and then you still have a timing window to play your fast spells. So,
yeah, no, it's a crazy card. It needs something because right now
we'll have to see how the meta develops, but it is one of the stronger reasons to play spell-based Ionia decks right now.
Yeah, so people have always complained. I'm coming back to Karma Ezreal a lot because that for me is one of my favorite decks. People have always complained about Rummage in Karma Ezreal because it ends up being a 1 mana discard 2 draw 4 on turn 10. This is a 2 mana draw 4 in Karma Ezreal. Like,
so I have a question. I have a question for you because I don't know how it interacts. If you control Karma, can you draw Karma's spell?
No, you can't. That would. Okay. I can say that with certainty because I was versing a Maokai deck and was really hoping to be able, like, he got me down to just having 3 karmas in deck, and I was really hoping to be able to draw 2 karmas to like find it out, and I couldn't. So.
Well, that's good to know because I might have tried to do that at some point.
Yeah, so that doesn't work. Champions do count as champions in the deck. They only turn into spells once they are in hand.
All right, I want to give a big shout out to the balance team of Legends of Runeterra. Thank you for buffing Kato to 4 health.
It's such a good change. It took the card from being unplayable to being like just good. Like,
Yeah.
it's not OP by any means.
Oh
Like,
yeah, I
it's
absolutely
just a
wouldn't play
good
this
card.
card outside of a very synergistic combo heavy deck like this. But
Exactly.
it was totally unplayable before, even if you wanted to go for something like this.
100%. It used to be 5-3 for those of you who don't know.
Oh yeah.
I didn't actually know for a while because I never saw the card. It was a 5-3, and for 5 mana, it just kind of dies. It has the same issue that Ash had, but even worse because it's more expensive. Because Ash at without any buffs is a 5-3, and it just kind of died a lot of the time the second you play it. This had the same problem, but it's like 1 more mana, so it's like super committal for what's probably just gonna die.
Oh, and it's not in Freylord, which is the best like deck buff faction, and it's not in the faction of Elixir of Iron. So
Yeah, it was literally a play 5 mana, watch Kato die. Like, that was the card in the last before it got buffed. Now it's either they have to spend a lot of removal on it, which is fine, like you're okay with that trade, or like you can swing with it, and even if you swing with it, a lot of the time it doesn't die because they want to block the overwhelm target.
and this is just a redundancy sort of for Lee Sin. Horns of the Dragon, having double attack, you'll give it overwhelm.
Yeah, if you give double attack
Kato.
overwhelm, it'll kill the unit the first attack,
Right.
usually, and then it will afterwards get a free attack at that nexus. So
It's sort of like hitting it twice. It's not quite as good as Lee Sin. Lee Sin actually hits twice, but
Yeah, it's still very good.
All right, let's move on. Okay, Noxus. Now we're going to talk about Swain, which is most people's favorite champion. I'm actually going to let you take the lead on Swain. You've played Swain maybe more than anybody else in the Discord at this point.
Yeah, so I basically saw Swain at first. I heavily underrated Swain. I thought when I looked at Swain, I was like, this card's bad. If you do 12 damage, you've probably already won the game. So why do I want to play this 5-drop if I've already won the game? But that was because me, as well as a lot of other people, were only looking at Swain in a burn deck. So in a Noxus P&Z style burn deck where almost all that 12 damage is going to the face, which means like hitting their necks. That is not how Swain wants to play. Right now, Swain is mostly being seen with TF, Twisted Fate, who we'll get into in the next video. But the main goal of Swain is to play similar to how Yasuo used to play in the last before the new set came out, where you're just trying to like survive and trade well in the early game. You're not trying to win the early game. You're trying to make it so they don't kill you early while you're leveling up Swain. And you can do this with a lot of cards. You can do this with burn cards. So like let me pull it up real quick.
Can you go over and explain the way he levels on damage? I think it's probably not clear to everybody.
So what Swain does, his level 1 version, if he hits the Nexus, he does 3 damage extra to the Nexus. He's also fearsome, which is nice, helps him get in sometimes when he wouldn't otherwise. His level up condition is when you've done 12 non-combat damage, he levels up. What 12 non-combat damage means is damage in any way, shape, or form that isn't during your attacking phase when your unit is striking their unit or vice versa. That's really important to understand that difference, because things like single combat that you would think would be combat damage, because it says single combat, well, it's actually not. It's not combat damage, so it helps Swain level up. Literally any non-combat damage, be it to their Nexus, to your Nexus. So if like you have Ember Maiden, and it does 1 damage to your Nexus and 1 damage to their Nexus, that's 2 for Swain. So if it hurts your Nexus, that's fine. If it hurts their Nexus, that's fine. If you happen to, what was that?
Hits everything. So let's say there's a bunch of units on the board.
Yep, that can instantly level up Swain, theoretically. If you have, if they have 5 units, you have 5 units, and that hits all 5 units plus the 2 Nexuses. Avalanche can instantly level up Swain. It is really, really, really easy to level up Swain. It's kind of the point of the last, 30 seconds.
This is
So yeah,
6,
the
for
general
example,
way.
Noxian Fervor. So,
Yep, Noxian Fervor is a 6 damage. It's half of a Swain level up.
so yeah.
And so what you do with Swain right now is you put him pretty much with Bilgewater, get a lot of the barrels out. We'll get into the barrels later, but basically they make your damage do more damage. So you put him with barrels, and you just do a bunch of damage in a control sense. So you're not doing the damage to their face or to their nexus. You do the damage to their units. You kill their units. Some of their cards will do damage to nexus as well. Make It Rain is like that. It'll do some damage to nexus. It'll do some damage to units. He also has a card that you pretty much always go with him called, I think it's something hand. It's Death's Hand, that does 2 damage to a unit.
Yeah.
2 damage to a unit, 1 damage to the nexus. So you will get some kind of accidental nexus damage in through these. The main goal of these cards is to deal with the units as they come out, while leveling up your Swain kind of on curve. On turn 5, you play Swain, and if you have ways to do damage to nexus, again, things like Make It Rain, things like Death's Hand, there's a few other ways, and we'll get to them in a second. You do damage to the nexus, you stun their strong units. Ideally, you stun enough units so that all of their units can't block a fearsome unit. You swing in with Swain, you completely clear their board, and you do damage to their nexus, and you've pretty much won the game if you can do that once. If you can get 1 attack in with Swain, you've probably won the game.
So I want to just comment on Swain as a card. Swain, again, is he's more build-aroundy, so than he is just a strong unit. You're not going to just throw Swain into a deck. The focus on non-combat damage actually is a big deterrent to playing him in aggro. I don't recommend playing him in aggro, actually, because in aggressive decks, usually you play strong units, and those units will deal a large chunk of the enemy's health total. So it's harder in those decks to deal the 12 non-combat damage anyway. And he's very unlikely to get in with this Nexus Strike. He has Fearsome, but he's a 5-drop, so your opponent's going to play units that have enough power to block him. So I think you have to build around him.
I would agree. He's not a slot in. He will level up in a burn deck, but he'll level up when you're killing the Nexus anyway. So what's the point of him, becomes the question.
Yeah, so you have to think about cards sort of in the cases that you find that you're going to play them and what the game state's going to be like. Usually when you play Swain on 5 in a burn deck, you're better off playing Decimate.
Yep.
Like Decimate wins you the game, and your opponent might be able to interact with Swain where he never deals damage.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true. Yeah, Swain can get blocked. Decimate can't. That's the kind of the simple version of that.
Yeah. So now let's get into the deck that you've been playing a lot.
Yeah, so this is my version. There's a couple versions that have been getting shared around, but this is my current version, and I'm constantly updating it. I've probably made, give or take, at this point, 30 edits to the deck, where I add 1 card, take out 1 card, cut 3 cards, add 3 cards, kind of things. The general way I play this is play your low-cost units to deal with their low-cost units, primarily against Bannermen. That's why they're there. So Crimson Disciple's there because it makes it so War Chefs can't really attack into you. It makes it so the Fleetweather Tracker can't really attack into you. I am testing that, though. That is a new thing I've put in. I might replace it with House Spiders. It just depends on how consistent I can get it to proc. So that's kind of where Crimson's at. You have the Dreadway Deckard, which is effectively just a way to make your burn do better. It creates a powder keg. Then you use the powder keg to improve your damage.
Explain a little bit about how the powdered keg interaction works. Like, when do you play the keg generators so that you're actually getting to use the kegs? Because I've seen a lot of people have trouble with just playing kegs and then just dying.
So you want to use a keg generator when either A, you know it will survive until next turn, or B, you have a way to use the keg that turn. So, for example, if I'm on turn 2 and I'm attacking, I am more than happy to play Dreadway Deckhand, because there's a very low odds with my opponent at 2 mana that he's going to find a way to kill my keg on my attack. However, if he's attacking, I'm going to wait until he attacks, let him do his 2 or 3 damage kind of into me, and then play Dreadway Deckhand to generate my keg. The reason being is because having a keg, especially in this deck, is really, really useful, because keg is a bit misleading. It makes it sound like your spells will do 1 extra damage, which is kind of true. But if you go over to go over to Nox in Favor if you don't mind. Actually, no, go over to Death's Hand if you don't mind. So Death's Hand says deal 2 damage to an enemy unit and 1 damage to their nexus. But if you have a keg, it actually does 3 damage to the enemy unit and 2 damage to their nexus. It doesn't just buff 1 damage; it'll actually buff 2 damage in this case. And that's per keg as well. So that works this way with this one. It works that way with Nox in Favor. It will do 4 damage to your unit and 4 damage to whatever else you point at Nox in Favor at. It works that way with Make It Rain. It'll do 2 damage to everything. So a keg does not just 1 extra damage. It'll end up doing, at minimum, 2 extra damage when it comes to Death's Hand, up to 3 extra damage per keg with Make It Rain.
I want to also point out the way that stacking works in case you just haven't been playing kegs. When it says it stacks, they only take up 1 unit slot, and it only ever has 1 health, even if you have multiple of them.
On top of that, if one dies, if one dies, they all die. That's really important to understand.
Oh yeah. When you use a spell, they all blow up.
Or if they kill one. So let's say they use their own Make It Rain and they hit your keg.
Right.
All the kegs die.
Right.
One kind of a bit cheeky thing that I saw one guy use was he used a Unyielding Spirit on a keg. And it just didn't die. Yeah, it's a unit. So Unyielding Spirit basically makes it so something can't die. And so he just had a keg for the whole game, and everything he did extra damage.
That is very bizarre.
It's never something I'd recommend, but if you want to make a meme deck, there's absolutely a meme deck in there.
That is funny.
But yeah, so generally speaking, how this deck plays, you want to stall until you can get to Swain. Hopefully by the time you play Swain, you have him leveled up. And then you play Swain. If you can get into it in attacks, great. If not, you wait till Leviathan. A Leviathan plus Swain on board, if it survives 1 turn, 95% of the time wins you the game. And the reason being, as Leviathan says, deal 1 damage to the enemy nexus 3 times. Which means, because of Swain, the strongest 3 enemies on their board will be stunned. Considering Leviathan and Swain have really good bodies on top of these abilities, you can deal with the three smallest units that they have really easily. And if you're attacking, you oftentimes will just stun all of their potential blockers for Swain, and you'll go in with an attack. I will say the 2 things that I'm unsure about in this deck are going to be, as I said earlier, the Crimson Disciple. I haven't 100% been certain on that, as well as Yordle Grifter. Yordle Grifter is a weird card. It's a 4-drop. It's the Allegiance card for Bilgewater. And the only reason I have that in here is to get the Warning Shot. If I get the Allegiance proc, cool. That's nice. I have a 50-50 shot at getting it because I run 20 cards of both regions. But it's really for the Warning Shot. Warning Shot is a burst way to proc Swain. So it allows me to open attack and stun their strongest unit before the open attack. It's 1v games.
This burst on warning shots really weird. I've been in situations where they go to kill kegs or something, and I've responded by warning shot the opponent, and it like kills them. It's just bizarre.
Hmm. Yeah,
Warning
it's
it's weird. There's not very many ways to deal burst direct damage. This might be the only way.
I think it is well, sorry, you do have transfusion on certain cards.
Oh yeah. Transfusion's another way to deal some burst damage. With
yeah, transfusion on disciple is another way.
It's just hard to deal burst direct damage in this game, and that's one way to do it. So that's just a neat application. And then,
I will say,
go ahead.
Warning Shot is never a card you will want to run in a main deck, ever. I can't think of any deck that will ever want to run Warning Shot as a main deck card.
It's probably just too weak. I've tried it some in dedicated plunder decks, but even there, you're giving up the card and you're not being as aggressive as you could be. So it loses. Dealing the 1 damage to anything would be better, and that makes Blade's Edge, and
that makes Blade Edge irrelevant if they make a burst damage 1 damage to anything.
Right. So Blade Edge is generally better in an aggressive deck, and so is Parley.
Yeah, I've considered running Parlay in this deck as well. I ended up not, because you just don't really have that many 1 damage. And you kind of need that. Like, for Parlay to be good in this deck, you need it to hit.
Yeah, you would need to have... This card's slow. Slow spells in general aren't particularly strong. And this one doesn't have that much impact either. Even though with a keg it does 2 and 2, it's just kind of too low impact to really justify the slot in this list.
No. But yeah, so that's this deck. If you have questions on it, contact me in Discord, and I will happily talk about this deck forever.